Do they know where to go to watch it or anything?
Yeah, I sent out the Eventbrite link to her.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Movie. The poster looks amazing, Amy, by the way. Like when you first sent it, I was like, oh my gosh, I love it.
Do they know where to go to watch it or anything?
Yeah, I sent out the
Oh, Professor.
We're live, people.
Yeah.
Professor, you're sharing your computer sound.
movie.
I know.
The poster looks amazing, Amy, by the way.
Actually,
It's from the video.
Yeah, it just so happened that we're on women. So
okay.
that's
But
awesome.
we are
It's
live.
live. It's good. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Cool.
We still got 5 minutes, so
Okay,
no worries.
well,
Manny.
but it worked. Amazing. I can't believe this. I'm shocked.
Is it not supposed to work? What?
Well, I shouldn't speak too soon, but every time we've done this, I have my own, like, YouTube, not a channel for videos, but I have a YouTube account. And then there's another record label account. And then there's the one so I tried to get rid of the other one, but I can't seem to do it without getting rid of everything. So we've always gone on the wrong one, and it's just been a pain in the butt, but this time it worked.
Oh.
Amazing.
Oh, I'll put it in the chat as each person's like getting introduced. It was on the doc. So, but yeah, kind of like where you're at right now. You guys have all traveled. I think I've only been out of California 3 times in my life. And then, yeah, figured we'd all have like stories about growing up in a traditional household.
Are we all zooming in from California this evening? LA, or anybody anywhere else? Or
I'm in San Francisco.
okay, well, that's far enough. The last time we did this, we had someone zooming in from Japan and someone else from Korea.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
I'm currently stuck at the Vancouver airport because my flight was delayed and the COVID policy changed with the US. So if you hear anything, I apologize. But normally I'm in New York.
Well, it's a nice airport to be stuck in anyway.
Yeah. Oh, is someone going to be just letting us know if there's questions in the YouTube?
Yeah, I can do that, or Lindsay, or any of
okay.
us. But yeah,
Yeah.
we'll work it out.
Yeah, we're both monitoring. I mean, I'm sure Robin's gonna be in the chat too. So we'll relay them to you at the Q&A whenever you guys want to have that.
So the way it works, Amy, is that viewers can't see Zoom; they can only see the YouTube. So they put their questions in the YouTube chat, not in the Zoom chat. So that's why Robin and maybe Lindsay will both be monitoring that, and then we'll ask the questions, as they can, and we'll all have our videos turned off so we don't distract. And that's it. And that's we'll just get the conversation going when we're ready in a couple minutes.
And you might want to wait, Amy, you might want to wait to share your screen until everyone is introduced so the audience can see their faces, because what happens with YouTube when Zoom is live streaming is the PowerPoint takes up like 75% of the screen, and then you see a face like in the little corner. But if you'd like, you can introduce everyone first and then start sharing your slides if that works for you.
Because I have the slides, like some pictures of what everybody I've been snooping.
Oh, okay, then that's perfect too. Okay, cool. Yeah, no problem.
And okay.
Are we doing this in this order? Because I don't want us to like start and then we're like stuttering about who should go next.
Oh, I got the names on there.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
You got it. Amazing. Thank you, Amy.
Amy has been very extremely organized in this whole thing, so she's got it together. Don't worry.
Like my first rodeo, can't mess this up.
It's perfect, so don't worry about it.
But yeah.
You're the best, Amy.
What's all from like trying to copying you for Asian American Collective, seeing how you are such a go-getter. I was like, I'm gonna be like Brittany today.
That's sweet. I look up to you. So
Oh! Oh. Well, this last excruciating minute. Should we get started now?
I'd wait just a few minutes for everyone to start
Okay.
filtering in, but we'll let you know.
Okay.
Yeah, fashionably late students. They have to. Well, a lot of students are just getting out of class too, so a few minutes.
I would give it about one more minute, and I'd say you're good to go.
Okay. Has it been a minute? I forgot to look.
Yeah, I think you're good to go.
Oh, okay. Yay! All right. So welcome. It's kind of strange because I'm not seeing like the crowd that's here. But yeah, welcome. To our Asian Pop Market Industry Insights. Today we've got some amazing people on the panel. So really quick, I'm Amy Louie, and I'm in the cohort 9 that is graduating this May from the Grad Music Industries Admin Program, and I'll be your moderator tonight. To give people some context, I'm a high school music teacher at Francis Polytechnic High School. It's in the Los Angeles Unified School District. So when COVID hit, my students experienced a shift in their goals and priorities about pursuing music as a career. So they were wanting to work in the industry, but unfortunately, I knew nothing outside of the Eurocentric performance-only system at the time. And so it brought me to CSUN to learn about what I can in order to help equip and motivate, community's youth. So just prepared some slides for, so just so you know, it just so happens that I am teaching at the high school that William Hung went to. And it's just so fitting that we're talking about Asians tonight. And then here's me with BTS cutouts. I had no idea they were even that tall. And your girl was struggling there. But now speaking of communities, I would like to introduce this amazing panel we have for you tonight. They're all women of color who are total bosses at their jobs, managing the companies, but they're really involved in the organizations to help provide direct help to their communities. And so let's start with Kathleen. You might have seen some of her work, especially with Eugene Liang's, the I'm Gay video, which was so moving because it's not talked about, being queer in the Asian community. And then also she's worked on the Kanye West Yeezus tour, among so many things. So I'm just going to let Kathleen talk really quick. But I just want to mention really quick that Lionshare is this amazing community where they have a podcast, and I've been studying that every day for half a year now, and it honestly belongs in a museum because it just captures so much of the culture and recommending all these different types of music. And so I'll just let Kathleen and talk about this.
Thank you so much. What an introduction. And yes, the podcast, which thank you so much for listening, is available on Spotify if anyone wants to check it out. It's co-hosted by myself and Allison Toy, who is also on the panel today. So I think for my intro, I should be identifying where I live, which is Los Angeles, California. And I think also I'll be mentioning some of the areas I've traveled, which is quite a lot. So I'm just going to narrow it down to the Asian countries that I've been to, which are Malaysia, China, Hong Kong, Japan, and Vietnam. Had many plans to visit more of those in 2020, but we all know what happened there. And in terms of a story that I have about growing up in an Asian household. So I think something that is relatable to many Asians, but also just, I think generally like pursuing a creative career isn't one that, is considered the traditional path for, I think anyone really, but I think in some cultures, maybe it's more acceptable or it's more supported. In mine, I would say that I went down the path of being a doctor. I, was pre-med in college. I even went on to take my MCATs, which I didn't do that well on, surprise, surprise. So I think for me, it was like, I always knew deep down inside. And if I'm going to be real, I think my mom also knew deep down inside that, I was always going to pursue a creative career, specifically one in music, because it was something that I had always loved and something that she had always pushed me to do. And I'll touch on this even more later, but everyone always asks me how I started working for Kanye because that was my first job in the industry. And it honestly came from the fact that I did Chinese folk dance my entire life. And through that, I learned like dance and ballet, and my love for dance led me to just like choreograph random dances with friends. And through one of those friends is how I got introduced to Kanye's choreographer. And that's how my entire music industry started. So all this to say, like, you never know, like who's going to be that person for you. And also just like, yeah, I think just pursue the passions that you have and the hobbies that you have, because that's what's going to like lead to a really fulfilling life and, some really memorable experiences.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, not to embarrass you, but we got to talk about this. You don't meet Mariah Carey and not talk about it.
Wow. I can't. Oh my God. I almost forgot about this. Thank you so much for bringing up this lovely memory. Yes. So again, something completely unexpected. Eugene is a really good friend of mine, Eugene Liang. We met at a upscale dim sum restaurant called Bao. I was a bartender. He was a server. And I produced a music video that he directed. And that was actually how we started our, friendship. And he's always known that I'm a huge Mariah Carey fan. I've been a Mariah Carey fan for pretty much as long as I can remember. My first password I ever made for like AOL had her name in it. That's like how dedicated I was. And so basically he had been asked by Mariah's team to like help promote this McDonald's thing that she was doing. And then he basically said, I'm only going to agree to this if I could invite my two friends who are huge like lambs, aka me and his other friend. And we had no idea. We like literally had no idea. He told me I was coming to his house to film a video for Try Guys, and I just did not know. So I was like completely shocked. I cried. She was I cried because she said my name, and I didn't realize at first. I thought it was a pre-recorded thing, and she said "Merry Christmas, Kathleen," and I literally just like was like, oh, like, whatever. My like 3 decades of fandom, I was just like, oh my God, could not take.
Oh, wow.
But she was so lovely, so engaged. Honestly, like listened to every single word we had to say. Like made jokes about everything. Like she was just really, really lovely. And I love her even more now. So
Oh my
thank you.
gosh. Wow.
Thank you. I appreciate you embarrassing me. This is something that I'm very proud of. So I'm
Oh,
happy to talk about it.
yeah. Wow. But yeah, that is so awesome. But
Yeah,
all
you're
right.
a good friend. Thank you, Eugene.
Yeah.
Never would have happened without him, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh man. But yeah, so next we got Allison, who's actually also the co-founder of Lionshare, and so she's also a DJ, and then she's also in the working at Twitch, which is, and so here we have. I thought it was really amazing to see the services you provide on your website. Like that you help artists overseas, and then that you also DJ yourself. So yeah, I'll let you talk a bit about that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, everyone. Again, I'm Allison. Some people just call me Toy. I'm fine with either. My pronouns are she, her. And I am actually based in San Francisco, California, which is where Twitch is headquartered. So, sort of as Amy has mentioned, I am one of the co-founders of Lionshare alongside Kathleen. So if you're a listener of that podcast, you might recognize my voice here, right? And in addition to that, I also work at Twitch on the music team, where I'm the senior manager of music community. So really what I do there is kind of looking after artists who are coming to Twitch for the first time, helping them to sort of understand what the service is and why they might get use out of it, and hopefully help them build a community there. So building community is super near and dear to my heart. And I'd say that Lionshare is very much centered around that. So definitely check us out if you haven't, guys. So yeah, I guess just to kick this off a little bit with like a little, a story, I guess, on my own background, my own family and everything. So I grew up in the Bay Area near San Francisco, and so did my parents. So unlike a lot of people my age, I'm actually like second, third generation American. So my parents were born and raised here as well. I think for me, I was really fortunate to grow up with a family that was really, really supportive of my interests in, pursuing music and whatnot. Both of my parents were independent business owners, so they kind of understood the sense of wanting to do something for yourself, having some independence and everything. I've lived in New York City, I've lived in San Francisco, and I also lived in Shanghai. And so, to speak a little bit about, my experiences out there and some of the places that I visited, I would definitely say that being Asian American, being Chinese American specifically, is very different from being Chinese. And I definitely learned that spending some time out in Asia. So yeah, I'm excited to share a little bit more about that with y'all today.
Yeah,
am I missing anything, Amy? Anything else?
Oh, there's one thing that it really caught my mind. Like, even though I heard it 2 weeks ago, it still stayed fresh. Where you speak so many languages, and it was amazing to me. Where when you like what types of messages or way of communicating that you use different languages. Like French is more for love, and then Chinese was more for. But yeah, if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, I've always really enjoyed the study of language. Actually, not unlike a lot of good Asian American kids, I grew up playing piano, I played violin. I feel that music and the study of music is a language in and of itself, right? And I took to that very, very much as a kid. And then when I started actually learning other languages, the first ones that I learned were Chinese and French. And I just found that there were so many interesting things that you could learn about a culture through the way that the language is taught, instructed, and thought of, right? There are certain words in Chinese that don't exist in English. There are certain sentiments that you can express with the French language that you can't as eloquently with English and everything. And so I always thought that was really interesting and just kind of fascinating way to interact with a different culture.
Yeah, and then before we move on, I just wanted to it was just looking at this is so fascinating, the China music services, and I was wondering if you could mention there what's what you do there for overseas kind of market there.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the grand scheme of the world's entertainment markets, right, China operates in a very different way from the rest of the world, which is to say that, over there, the internet is more like an intranet, right? So, a lot of foreign media a lot of foreign media platforms, social media platforms, right, are not available in China. So China has sort of its own ecosystem, right? So it's got different DSPs, music streaming services out there. It's got different social media platforms as well. And so for any Western artists or internationally renowned artists who's looking to make inroads into China, having a presence on those platforms is really important, right? Because the majority of people in China consume the media that they consume in Chinese. And so each of these platforms, although they have a lot of similarities with, say, Twitter or Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, do have their little nuances and work in a slightly different way in China. So a lot of the work that I was doing when I was based out there, less so now, but a lot of the work that I was doing when I was based out there was around helping some of those Western artists that I had worked with in the States over many years understand how to like activate in the China market, speak to people in a sort of culturally conscious and relevant way, and overall just learn how to navigate the very different landscape in mainland China.
Wow. Yeah, like even as like a second generation, Chinese American, where my family came from China, like I'm even struggling with the language. And I go to a supermarket and they're like, look, this girl probably can't even speak it. And then I was like, I could at least hear what you just say. So yeah, and whenever you and Kathleen speak Mandarin, I was like,
wow. I think you're giving me more credit than I deserve. I'm really good in a restaurant. I'm really good in a club, but outside of that, my language level there is definitely far from perfect.
Not true. She's downplaying it.
Yeah, I heard it on the podcast.
Very true.
But so now we also have Jashima, who's just so involved in the community. My mind's blown by all the things that you've done, and just helping the South Asian youth community, because whenever we talk about Asians, we think of, like Kathleen would say, it's a monolith, on a podcast. And a lot of people just think we're a monolith. We're all together. But I think that's like the Western perception because of history and how we have to band together. And there's not much representation for South Asians. And so I'm so glad Jashima is here with us tonight. So yeah, if you could talk about some of the organizations you're a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. Really happy to be here. I'm unfortunately stuck at the Vancouver airport trying to get home to New York. So if you hear kids crying, I'm really sorry. So I am the co-founder of Ode, which is a brand strategy and artist management company that predominantly focuses on working with children of immigrant or immigrant-owned business brands and artists. And we consult with a lot of companies and record labels on go-to-market strategy for the South Asian diaspora countries, as well as the subcontinent and the West. But more excitingly, community-facing, I lead music partnerships at a South Asian diaspora magazine called Brown Girl, and we manage 5 artists ourselves at Ode. So lots of community stuff, but I think I meant to say where I'm usually based. I'm usually based in Queens, New York, the borough of the world. And I think one of the more defining moments for me growing up being South Asian, which I'll talk about why I think the term is interesting momentarily, is my parents. I think I was never forced into academia or these traditional careers, but their worst fear was me choosing entrepreneurship because they were entrepreneurs that didn't have access to education and were very, very far from the model minority myth. And so they were like, we've worked this hard and you chose a path that doesn't have a guaranteed outcome. Are you sure you want to do this? And there was no proof of concept for me to say, hey, look at these artists that were born in North America and they're successful and it's fine, because there really weren't. And so I started to write, and I covered artists everywhere I could find them as young as I can remember, from the kid playing violin and beatboxing in orchestra in elementary school to like Tony from No Doubt and stalking Soumya Krishnamurthy from MTV and being like, a brown woman's on TV talking about hip hop. And that storytelling over years compounded into realizing that there were such massive gaps of knowledge. Similar to what Allison said, India's music industry functions excessively differently to the rest of the world. There's no royalty distribution infrastructure. It's a film-driven country. Things are very, very different for artists there. And it was interesting in the present world to be put under the umbrella of South Asia, and we're all South Asian in efforts of representation, which is amazing because it's definitely a real experience that Indians take dominance in the West, but it's also a real experience that South Asia is 8 to 9 countries, depending on the map you're trying to look at. So we're all really excited to be given platforms like this to talk a little bit about what it means to do things beyond buzzwords like Asian or AAPI or South Asian, because they're so inherently different but beautiful. So I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. When Professor Sermani and Lindsay approached me, I was like, okay, I feel like Nick Fury assembling this panel of Avengers. And so, after I was listening for a while to the Lionshare podcast, I was like, just really swept up into, more inclusivity and diversity. But even though under the Asian umbrella, there's just so much diversity there, we're just glad that we're able to have that representation of, more South Asian. So yeah, thanks for being here. And then we also have awesome Brittany. So she is at Interscope, but before that she was at 88 Rising and also AWOL. But she is also an amazing contributor for Asian American Collective. She handles social media and also part-time model for our new merch that just dropped. Brittany, I thought it'd be a cool idea for everyone also to see the day-to-day management, because she works in so much project management and also for artists that are overseas. Brittany, if you could talk about all your work there.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'll cover day to day as we kind of talk about our roles in the music industry and how we got into them. But I'm Brittany. I started my career off in music, working for like a small entertainment or electronic label called Moving Castle, where I also worked with Asian talent and moved on to AWOL, to 88 Rising, and now I'm at Interscope. I'm very excited to be here and talk about the Asian pop space. It's something that I have spent the past few years studying. During my time at 88 Rising, I worked K-pop, so that's like a very specific and niche market that I feel like I know a little bit about now. I'm currently based in Los Angeles. I've been based in Los Angeles ever since I was born, technically, but since I graduated college and started working professionally. And a brief story about my upbringing. I think that I grew up in I'm first generation Vietnamese American. My parents were refugees, and they met each other at a Malaysian refugee camp and found each other in the States. It's like my favorite story. But I spent a lot of my adolescence growing up in an upper middle class, predominantly white community, rejecting and stepping away from my Asian side and separating myself from it. And I think in college was when I, realized I became friends with a group of Asian people who were proud to be Asians. And it was a really telling and moment for me. So I spend a lot of my career now getting involved with the Asian community and being super active in making sure that there's representation and that we're having these conversations, because I think young me would have really appreciated that growing up. And I think maybe I would have had a totally different experience had there have been these opportunities and these people talking to me about it. So, yeah.
Oh, cool. Oh, man, I'm so sorry. Every 10 minutes, my lights go off. So you see me just frantically waving. But yeah, so... she's also part-time model for Asian American Collective. We just got our new merch. And 100% of the proceeds go back to the community. We are a 501c3, or is it 3C? Oh boy. Yeah, there we go. And it's kind of amazing where we're all technically here, all the panelists here are somewhat associated with Asian American Collective. Like Kathleen was one of our awesome mentors. So we provide one-on-one mentorship. And so, and then from there, I just wanted to show you quickly an overview of topics that we have planned out, but feel free to, post questions for us and that we could, get to. So one of the Robin, could you tell me if it's hard to see on the YouTube side if I
Well,
have
you-
my share screen?
You could see this screen perfectly.
Oh, okay. Would it be hard to see our individual the speaker?
They're in a corner of the screen.
Oh, okay. All right. But yeah, so I'll just pop up the questions then. But so first off, what's your current position, and then maybe like your day to day, so it helps us conceptualize. Because when we hear CEO, we're like, oh, what do CEOs do? Because we're starting our careers, right? We're still students. And then how did you get to where you are now? Like the maybe what entry level positions you've had, and then what's popping in the Asian pop market. Differences in how we consume music between those of us in the U.S. and those in Asia, and then differences in how to manage the projects between Asian versus U.S. artists. And then also, it's really interesting. We're seeing people that are from America go to Asia to be in groups. Pop groups, and then they come back as soloists. And so I thought that was a cool thing to get into. And then also, of course, South Asian representation. And then from there, any issues. Actually, I'll just pop up those questions as we go. So I'll stop the screen share so we can see everybody. So yeah, the first question is your day-to-day. Like when you wake up in the morning, like to the time you sleep, what your position or what you do in your day.
I guess I can start since that was the order last time. So my day-to-day is different every day, which I think is very typical of any entrepreneur. And there isn't like a real start to the day or a real end to the day. Unfortunately, I think you can, whatever your perspective is on that. But for me, so I have technically 3 different companies that are mine. And depending on the day, there's usually a focus on either or, pending like phone calls and things like that. I think it's a lot of it is run by like more urgent matters, more priorities. I am trying to move towards it, being able to just like set better goals and not just have to put out fires all the time, which unfortunately is a lot of running a business. But yeah, I think a lot of it is on meetings. It's on answering emails. It's, talking to clients, pitching clients. I think a lot of being an entrepreneur is, constantly having to, onboard new clients, onboard new hires. But for me, that's something that's exciting. I love to like meet new people. I love to have new experiences and work on new projects all the time. But if all of this sounds not fun for you, then I would say don't be an entrepreneur. But yeah, I don't know if that was specific enough, but I tried.
But do your 3 companies overlap? Because it would just like...
Yes, I would say yes, they do in some weird ways. So the 3 companies I have are Lionshare, which we've talked about already. I also have a company called Gifting, which we do like curated experiential gift boxes that support minority-owned businesses. But for example, a project we did recently was for Lisa Ling's new show on HBO called Takeout. We did these like very custom oversized takeout boxes that featured 12 Asian-owned brands, food brands. And on the Lionshare side, we were able to consult and bring in, chefs as well as other like brands in our network to participate in the box, because this was going to like a bunch of big celebrities and all this stuff. So it was great exposure. And then we also were able to bring in a partnership to do like a live event activation in promotion of the show. So, and also we helped curate some of the recipients of the list, just from like the more like, celebrity Asian, like in our community. So it was like a really cool project to be able to kind of work on from end to end, and bring in, different sides. HBO as a client was obviously really happy, because not only did we like, produce this box for them, but we also were able to just help, amplify it in like to the community that they wanted to reach. So when things like that happen, it's great. And I would say they honestly happen more often than not. But yes, I have to wear different hats at different times.
Yeah. And then Allison, since you're part of that world.
Yeah. Can you remind me of the first question here? It's what my day-to-day looks like,
Yeah.
right? Got it. So at present right now, I work full-time at Twitch. And then I also manage Lionshare in addition to that. So I would say my day-to-day is generally jam-packed with things to do and not a whole lot of breathing room. So I tend to work sort of traditional business hours, but get up early to knock out my Lionshare work earlier in the day, as well as at the end of the day, usually around this time. So quite busy in that regard. I'm fortunate in that the work that I do both at Twitch and with Lionshare is very collaborative. We have a lot of partnerships, whether it's with brands or with creators, artists, or other sort of like-minded, entities or companies in the space and whatnot. I'm blessed with the ability to be on Zoom calls all day, every day, chatting with folks, collaborating, putting things together. And so, for me, I wouldn't have it any other way, believe it or not. And yeah, I really enjoy it.
Wow. Yeah. And then we could go in that order. Yeah, we had, but yeah, Jashima.
Yeah, it's everything Kathleen said. I also work across 3 to 4 different companies. 2 of them are mine, but it's a lot of different hats. Right now, we're onboarding a lot of booking agent contractors and new artists this year that are based in different countries and sing in different languages and transcend genres. And I think if I had to narrow it down to 3 things, it's a lot of learning, educating, and executing, because a lot of the times we're making pitch decks on things brands have never heard of. We're pitching artists in a way people don't know how to consume. And so it's a lot of operations and a lot of copy. We get to be really creative, which I'm really grateful for, but it's a lot of storytelling, and then all the stuff no one tells you about, like spreadsheets and budgets and projections and market rates and these not so sexy parts of the music industry.
Wow. Well, yeah. And then Brittany?
Yeah, so I am currently a marketing manager at Interscope. I work across the pop and rock marketing roster there. So my day-to-day is also a lot of meetings, marketing management and project management. It's just a lot of communicating across multiple teams with different people, working across my roster of artists on their campaigns to bring a bunch of ideas to life, and then a lot of troubleshooting and stuff like that. So it's just a lot of talking and Zooms, like Allison said, budgets as well, trying to make magic happen with little money is always how it kind of works in music. That's
teaching too, somehow.
Yeah.
But yeah, wow. Okay. And then but yeah, if there are any questions related to that that we have from the audience? No? On the YouTube side?
None from the audience yet.
Okay. All right. And then so of course, like, how did you get to where you are now? So since we're mostly students here listening, just to see that pathway, because we're tired of hearing just work hard. Well, if we're ready to work hard, are we screwed? So yeah, that kind of that stepping stone, the pathway to where you are now.
I guess I can start again. So in terms of how I got started in the industry, I feel as though my story is a bit non-traditional in many ways. I actually, when I moved to Los Angeles, I wasn't here to pursue a career in music. I actually was here to pursue a career in the film industry. I wanted to be an actor and I wanted to be a screenwriter. But the goal was always to help elevate and increase Asian representation in media. So I thought to do that, I needed to do it through film. I got the opportunity to work for Kanye West at Coachella in 2011. And it was very random. I think I mentioned it was through a friend who I was friends with in high school that I met as the dancer. She was an amazing dancer. I was like an okay dancer, but I'd always like have her choreograph the, college culture shows that we did and things like that. And then I would just be in the back, like just trying to copy her kind of thing. But we just kept in touch. And honestly, I think we were just each other's biggest supporters. We both moved away. I grew up in Virginia. We both moved away pretty quickly after we graduated college. She moved to New York. I moved to Los Angeles. And all this to say, it was just like, I think that support that in that community that is so important, especially early on in your career, but I think throughout the entire length of your career, you just never know. And not to say you should stay in touch with people just for that reason, but just overall, I think tons, like almost all of my opportunities that I've ever gotten that have led to something really big or a client that I've always wanted to work with has come from somebody that, you know, I just was checking in on, or I ran into, or, you know, somebody that I helped with something or got them a job somewhere. And, you know, without this Kanye opportunity, my entire music career would have never started. And the only reason why it happened was because, like I said, we were, you know, just keeping tabs on each other, like checking each other on Facebook. Like whenever she booked a dance audition, I'd be like, yay, Jean. And like, same with me. And so she thought of me. I was top of mind when this opportunity came about. And yeah, I mean, that's always my biggest advice, I think, to anyone starting out their career, actually just anyone generally, but especially starting out your career, is just really like authentically and genuinely like creating that community, like supporting people, you know, coming to their events when you say you will, and congratulating them on a new job, like whatever it is. It's like these things really do matter. And the only way that you get more and more opportunities is from, you know, the people that are in your circle. So
Yeah, there's also a really helpful message where I see so many times, like on Facebook, just like these people wanting to reach up, you know, in the hierarchy when we should be, you know, networking across. So rather than reaching for, you know, this person of this big company, just reach out to your friends and then provide each other opportunities. So
yeah, that's you do both. And that's the thing. I never shy. I always tell people too, like, reach out to that person on LinkedIn. Like, the worst thing they can do is ignore you or like say no, I guess. But overall, it's just like, if you don't reach out to that friend and catch up with that you haven't spoken to in like 6 months, or if you don't reach out to the person on LinkedIn or whatever, it's like, then that connection's not going to happen. And then you never know what could have come from it. But it's just about making that effort.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, yeah, Allison, so how did you get to where you are now? Like in case you forgot the question.
No worries. So, you know, for me, I would say compared to Kathleen, and we always joke about this as partners in Lion's Share, that our backgrounds and the journeys that we've taken to get to a kind of similar place have actually been really, really different, right? I'd say for me, mine, you know, first off, I'll say, I don't think any music industry journey is ever linear. And I don't think that it should be. You know, in so many ways, we go into this business, we care about this industry because it's dynamic and because it's exciting. And a big part of that is constant change, right? And so that being said, I would say I probably have had a more linear path than a lot of people in the music industry would say, which is to say that rather than being, you know, an entrepreneur for the majority of my career, I've kind of worked at larger companies, and that's sort of like what's helped me to build my network, get me access to different things. I'm always in shock and awe of Kathleen's ability to have the world's greatest Rolodex without having the backing of some big company along the way. But you know, for myself, I studied music business myself. I went to NYU back in the day. It was really expensive, and I'm still paying for it. And you know, before I graduated, I started working in the booking world. So I started at William Morris Endeavor, eventually got sought out by CAA and went over there. And that's kind of where I began my career. You know, similar to what Kathleen said as well, like I think that the emphasis that I put on networking was probably the single most meaningful thing for me in my career advancement. And to be honest, I really didn't see it as networking at the time. It was just making friends, you know? And I think one of the beautiful things about working in the live music industry specifically is that oftentimes it requires your physical presence, right? You got to go to the show and settle it with the promoter and say hi to the tour manager and shake the artist's hand and all these different things. And, do that a few times a week for several years at a time as a very young person in the industry where you don't have a lot more to offer than, your time, your energy, your enthusiasm and whatnot. That's what really helped me get my foot in the door in so many different ways. And, a lot of the people that I met in the very, very beginning of my career are the people that I collaborate with the most now, or the people that have helped me out the most in recent years. Because as you advance, the people that you came up with do the same, right? And I think in a business that is very like referential, very based on relationships and everything, if those relationships are genuine, it doesn't matter how long time has, how much time has gone by since you last spoke with one another, helped one another. If I had a great experience with you 10 years ago, I'm likely to help you out 10 years after, And so I think that's something that I always, a bit of advice that I always pass on to folks who are early or just starting out in their music industry careers is this is a fun business, and have fun with it, make friends, and watch those friends turn into some of your collaborators or your business partners in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Jashina?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said thus far. But above all else, I think I would say to stay consistent, even when you're not sure what you're doing is going to result in an outcome, if you can. I think there's a lot of culture around quitting jobs and starting businesses and LLCs and these funny buzzwords on the internet. But I had the most non-traditional path in a lot of ways. I was studying marketing and philosophy, and I realized that there were no ins anywhere for South Asians and record labels or public facing artists outside of maybe like 3 that weren't actually from the subcontinent. And so I realized if I wanted to apply the things I loved about marketing and event planning and brand partnerships, which was organizing and promoting and throwing events to my communities, I needed to learn every part of the music industry and figure out which part I was best at. And it ended up being management and strategy. But I joke that I got into debt with my own 2-year unpaid internship by like literally cold emailing or calling people or going to South Asian dance classes in New York City and being like, oh, you throw a festival? Can I do a SWOT analysis after the festival? And like asking people to let me do things. I remember taping floors, learning how to do AV at a venue, learning how to run ads. And so I learned everything and I became a jack of all trades. And then I started picking the areas that I thought I would be best at. And it turned out to be strategy and management. But yeah, I was writing about artists so young, and I wrote about them because I was their fan first. I saw Tony perform from No Doubt. I would see Soumya on screen. I had these references and these people that I was like so grateful just existed. And I think coming from a place where you love music or you love something, if you love it, you can stay consistent with it. Someone's listening to it. So worry about the people that are engaging with whatever you're creating and trying to do, and not so much about the people that aren't, because they're rising with you. Like Allison said, you never know who's going to be next to you in a few years. And so do what you love if you can. And if you can find a way to monetize it, even better, but just stay consistent.
Yeah, that's such a great tip where, I'm teaching the youth here, and, you're providing opportunities and sometimes they're just not taking it. Like just, so what if it's just like 2 hours here and there, but yeah, that's a great advice there. But yeah, Brittany.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that everyone has said. I also got into music because I love it. I went through college. I majored in film. I thought I was going to work in the film or entertainment industry. I genuinely didn't realize that music was a career that people could pursue. So you guys are already miles ahead of me there, everybody watching. It never occurred to me, and I'd been going to concerts my entire life. But I had an epiphany moment. I was going to shows a ton with my friends in college, and I was like, who's making money off of this? How do I do this? And there's a tweet somewhere in the universe where I was at the time I was a graphic designer, so I thought I wanted to go into design. So there's a tweet out there somewhere that's how do I get a job in the music industry, designing album covers or something like that. But a month later, I saw Brett Blackman, who is the co-founder of Moving Castle, post on Twitter that he was looking for interns. So I, tweeted at him. I started interning for Moving Castle, and that was like my first foray into music. And it was a great place to like learn. Like I genuinely knew nothing about the industry. I didn't know what a master was. There's like an email somewhere there where I'm like, what's a master? Like I knew nothing. But it was a really, really good first role, and I got to, because it's such a small team, Moving Castle at the time was like 5 people and probably still is, but like I got a hand in a lot of things. And from there, like what Allison was saying, like every opportunity kind of came from the connections I made and the foundation that I had built before that. So I went to work for AWOL, which is an independent label, and joined the team across like all of their marketing, like project managers. I was a marketing coordinator at the time. So I worked across this like incredible roster of indie bedroom pop artists when like bedroom pop was at its peak. Left that and went to 88 Rising, where I worked in more of the Asian music space, worked across all the K-pop artists on the label. So I hadn't listened to K-pop for, 10 years since Big Bang era when I was in high school. So that was a really fun thing for me to learn and like re-educate myself on that side of the market. And now I am at Interscope, and yeah, like every role that I've learned, like I got the role at Interscope because of a friend who I'd worked with before. So like echoing what everyone else has said, like you never know who is going to be in your corner, and the best thing that you can do for yourself is make really genuine and authentic friendships and find a community of people who you support and that will support you back, and that will all come back to you.
Wow. Yeah, so such great tips, everyone. Yeah, I hope everyone's able to apply that or remember this for years to come. But yeah, so let's get into the pop market in Asia. So the first question here is, what are the differences in how people consume music and how they engage in music between Asia and us in the States?
I'm going to throw this one to Allison because I think she's had a little bit more, at least from what I know, a little bit more experience in this area because she did live in Asia for a little bit. And I actually gleaned some of this knowledge from her myself. So Allison, kick it off.
You could just put me on the spot, girl. That's fine. So, the first thing that I'll say is that I did spend time living in Asia. I was there for almost 2 years. And I was based in Shanghai, which is in mainland China, right? So I'm really, when I'm speaking broadly about the Asian sort of pop market generally, I'm thinking most specifically about mainland China, which I have to say is really, really different from a lot of the other countries there, right? I think first and foremost, one of the things that I found to be really interesting about the way that, music in China sort of got popularized in the time that I was there versus the US was that I felt oftentimes like a lot of the marketing and the presentation of the artists that were getting the most traction and excitement was usually very much happening from like the top down rather than the bottom up, right? So I think here in the States, oftentimes we see there are a lot of artists who begin independently. They're self-starters. They figure out how to fund their own tours. They're really bootstrapping it in the beginning. And maybe that's like what helps them to get to a point where they get a record deal or they're able to sign with an agent or find, a manager and whatnot. I found that in Asia, oftentimes, and I think I think that this applies to K-pop specifically. I think it also applies to a lot of what I see in mainland China. But, generally, like there are bigger, larger entertainment companies that often sign talent earlier on in their careers and really play an active role in helping to develop them, right? And so I think when you take like a bird's eye view of what this looks like in China, at least, which is where my knowledge is the greatest probably, is that generally you'll see probably a lower volume of artists. Like they're generally less because more resources are being allocated towards each of them. So I thought that was something that was really interesting. I think it's definitely possible to be an independent artist in a place like China where you are working towards building your own career kind of in a similar fashion to what I had described seeing most often out here in the West. But I think that, oftentimes they do reach a point by which there's, real gatekeepers, because a lot of the most influential, highest paid, highest circulated media and opportunities for exposure are kind of controlled by a relatively small group of companies or people, right? So I think that's one thing that's really different. In some ways, I would say that the West can be a little bit more democratic for artists in some way. I think another thing that is really, really interesting and something that I think a lot now, looking after music community at Twitch, is the idea of fandoms and super fans. So, when I say fandom, I guess at least for Asia, what I'm kind of broadly referring to is a kind of self-organizing group of fans, people who are connected to one another by literally nothing but their obsession or their love of a particular artist or group. And they take it upon themselves to self-organize in many ways, right? So one of the things that I could cite as an example is there is a big Chinese pop star who also used to be in a K-pop group called Chris Wu. He kind of is like let's just say the Justin Bieber of China, not a perfect analogy, but in terms of like how obsessed people are with him, how famous he is, like I'd say pretty much at that level, right? There was an instance where he put out a primarily English language album in the US. And it was so important to his fans that they support him on his journey as a musician, as an artist, that all these fans self-organized, figured out ways to get on VPNs that allowed them to bypass the Chinese firewall and purchase Chris Wu's album from the US iTunes store, which then inflated his sales to be greater than that of Ariana Grande, who also had a release that month. So I think, suffice it to say, that the idea of fandom and the devotion and the self-organization is something that I think that like a lot of Western artists are just kind of scratching the surface of or starting to think about more. You might see it in the form of people creating a Discord as a music producer, for example, or maybe it's having a fan club or like a text, like a text group for your fans and whatnot. I think that the West are finding ways to harness that now. And I think as artists are starting to recognize the importance of community, especially with like Web3 and everything on around the corner, and the idea of community and collective ownership and whatnot, I think the West actually has quite a lot to learn from Asia in that regard.
Wow.
I'm going to jump off that because I have this conversation all the time with my friends. Obviously, working in K-pop, I understand fandom very well. And I was a fan, growing up of like NSYNC and, all those boy bands growing up. So I think that I would say that in the K-pop space, you see a lot of entertainment companies manufacturing, these groups, and the K-pop groups that you see kind of come out have been chosen and handpicked and have gone through various training. What the K-pop entertainment space does really well, and I can mostly speak to the Korean pop music industry and not to China or any other kind of like Asian market, but what they do really well is capitalize on, the artists that they put forward. So everything is a direct kind of like correlation to capitalism. They're really good at making content. They're really good at making you feel very connected to the like group and the community. And they really create this world around their artists that I do think that like right now in the music industry in the US, we're still learning how to do, or they're still learning how to do. And like Allison said, like there's small ways that we're doing it, the text lines, but the way that like K-pop groups go on live all the time and they chat with their fans, face to face. And there is like this element of that you really feel connected to a group, that you harness this community that will champion you no matter what, that will fight for you, that will go to all ends of the earth to make sure that everything you do is successful, is a really incredible and like powerful thing. And so much of that is an Asian market too. Like Southeast Asia is a very kind of like sleeper market, but it is a huge market for most artists, including the US. You'll see a lot of like pop artists. Lau, for example, like sells out stadiums in Southeast Asia, you know, and he's doing, you know, Will Turns here, which is still very impressive, but there, like, he's selling out arenas. And so I think that there is so much that we can learn from the Asian market, and all of it is to say a lot of their model would not work in the US because we favor artists and we grow and hone talent that we champion talent that, you know, has grown itself, so to speak. But in terms of like how we engage with the community and how we build a community around our art, I think that there are lessons to be learned. For sure.
Yeah, like, and you just mentioned engagement, and I just remembered that, well, Kathleen and Allison, you both DJ'd overseas. I was just wondering how's that like?
Oh man, DJing overseas is a world of difference. And again, I can speak to China much better. For me personally, I actually absolutely love DJing in China. I think there really is this sort of like stigma or assumption around Chinese music fans that like they don't turn up as much as we do in the States, or they don't care about music in the same way that we do. And I think that that's simply untrue, probably comes from a place of ignorance more than anything else. But, you know, I've had some of the most fun DJ nights out there. And I think one of the things that I selfishly really enjoyed about it is that, you know, I think here in the West and specifically in the US, right, we have pretty well-defined like collective music knowledge, right? Like there are things that you can play in the club that you know are going to get a crowd in a certain city or of a certain age group to go off. Like, you know, people to an extent might even come, especially to a commercial club, with expectations of hearing, you know, I want to hear the top 40 that's popular now. Like we need Travis Scott, we need Drake, we need whatever it is, right? I don't think that that like super predefined collective music knowledge exists in the same way, at least for club oriented music out in China, as it does in the West. So for a DJ, you have carte blanche to get creative, put people on to new stuff. You know, going out and having a fun time isn't contingent upon screaming the lyrics of the songs that you know. It's just about connecting to the music in so many different ways. And so for me personally, that was actually a really big surprise for me going to China. I've DJ'd for 15 years at this point, which is like crazy to think about. And the majority of that time was in New York, and it was a very different experience. So I miss it, and I hope to be out there soon. And then when you leave the club, all the restaurants are still open. So it's a good time.
Oh, Jashima?
I will say, I think India is astronomically different. We manage a pop artist named Avanti Nagrel, who's born here but was raised majority in India and is based there now, amongst a couple of other pop artists. But there's a couple of differences that I think some sound like similarities to China, but structural ones from an industry standpoint are that it's a film dominated culture up until the last 5 to 7 years. So what would happen is a film would get commissioned and you would hire a composition house or producers to produce a score for that film, and they would be bought out. So very few people in the Indian ecosystem are making any money off of their music outside of what they were paid upon creating the score. And those songs go on to do billions and trillions of views sometimes. And similar to what Allison said, you know, there's definitely a democratization that exists in the West that doesn't there, but it's starting to build itself, which is really an exciting opportunity because artists like Avanti are able to take this Western way of having more of a direct pipeline to your fans, owning your content, working for it, getting in the grit, and apply that logic there, because for the first time, the Indian audience isn't being treated like they are a monolith within their own country, because typically 3 to 8 companies and marketing giants and management entities are who are marketing to the entire country. And now there's a really, really robust, really wonderful indie scene. And similarly, performing in India is such a different energy. I think we're a very emotional people that aren't afraid of feeling feelings. And for pop music, that's amazing, because when you're singing about love, there's no one embarrassed to be sad or happy about being in love. They're in it with you. And that feeling is very visceral and very palpable. And I think in the West, we're still getting over the need to be industry validated when we should be focusing on being fan validated. So we're super audience facing there. And that feels important to talk about, you know? We don't think it's corny that we make videos or hang out with our fans in their Discord. Avanti is half Marathi, which is a state in India, and half Punjabi, which is a state in India. And a paranta is a stuffed bread food that's round. And her fans self-proclaim themselves as parantas. And our Discord channel has 9 different paranta channels where people talk about what paranta they identify with. We do like talent shows, and we hire from there. It's the most rewarding experience in the world to be like, oh, you really loved our last EP, you sent in artwork, can we hire you to make the next set, you know? Wow. And it's for the people, by the people. And I think a country like India doesn't get enough credit for the amount of incredible music that comes out of it and how different it is. Like, there's still the rest of South Asia as well, but yeah. And then I guess something a little nerdy is in India, producers, songwriters, and composers are actually more credited than the singers. You'll often hear people say like A.R. Rahman did that film, or Vishal Shekhar did that song, and those are composers and producers and lyricists. And in the West, I think often those people are the most underpaid and undervalued. Hip hop has done immense amount of work for producers recently, but like lyricists and songwriters are treated terribly here in terms of their splits and how they get to scale careers. And in India, it's actually the opposite, right? An artist will be asked to sing something called playback, which means you're just singing for the film. But yeah, it's exciting. It's definitely different, and there's pros and cons on both sides.
Seema, put us on. We need some of these artists on our podcast.
I would love that.
We're gonna message you after. I would love to hear.
Did I facilitate this?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Take credit for that.
But yeah, I was meaning to ask Kathleen to also. You were saying on the Line Share podcast where you had a DJ in Japan at the last minute. Like what?
Well, that was complete like happenstance. I was in Japan with this DJ What's So Not. He was performing at a festival called Snow Machine in Hakuba, and we were in Tokyo with one of my friends who was just like super plugged in the music industry, and she had booked him a last minute set at the One Oak in Tokyo, and he asked me to open for him. And you know, like any good DJ, I always have my USBs on me and my headphones just in case. But I did call one of my really good friends, Zoe, at the last minute because he has been touring in Asia for years and years, all different countries. And he was a huge help because he actually ended up sending me a bunch of tracks that he was like, oh, this will go off in Japan. And actually something that I learned from him was that he actually had to learn like trial by error, basically, about what types of music genres and things like that go better in different countries, because as we have said many times, you know, Asia is not a monolith, and you know, also that applies to like music tastes and things that will do well in one country might not do well in others. Like he was telling me, like in Thailand, like he plays a lot of dembao and like would never be able to do that in China because it wouldn't go off that way. But it's just like, you know, just like little interesting nuances like that. Like he had to fall flat on his face. Like he told me multiple times in different venues. And as like a seasoned DJ, that's really hard. But it was like, you know, those experiences that made him realize, like, okay, this is what does well here. This is what does well here. Thankfully, I didn't have to do that because he told me what does well and literally sent me like a bunch of tracks. And he was like, playlist. And I was like, great. But yeah, shout out Zoe. He's LA based as well. Zoe Mano. You know, DJs, I think he's Dumbfounded's DJ. Also does a lot for the community. He's half Filipino. But yeah, thanks.
Wow.
Thanks, Zoe.
Yeah.
I think I can cite an American pop duo example that I think is really fun. Eric Nam and Armand Malik just did a song, and now the West is starting to understand their music and plug it into teen pop environments. The East didn't really wait for them to be on billboards here to like them. So I think in America, a lot of artists are so gritty and working hard, but they're also waiting until they get that first South by Southwest showcase or this other showcase or get a feature with an industry producer. In the East, they're kind of like, no, this slaps and I really like it and I don't care. And that feels sonically more respectful. It's a little different.
Wow. Do you think it's just because the, you know, industry giants especially like the big labels, just have such a control over that process. Or why do you think that is, though, that it's so different?
I think we're still in puberty in the West when it comes to understanding what the inclusion part of diversity and inclusion looks like, because a lot of these communities, at least the ones that I come from, they're doing this in real time. They've never had a South Asian showcase before, much less a more specific regional showcase. If there's an incredible R&B artist named Anjali Taneja based out of Baltimore, but for many years of her career earlier, it was always like Indian American R&B singer, and everyone assumed she sang in Hindi for God knows what reason. And so I think we're still in the portion where we're learning that lack of knowing how to take a fan and connect them to a community because you don't know about their culture, what they're comfortable with, can only be resolved by making sure that people on the teams at record labels and companies are diverse and that they ask the artists the questions instead of trying to plug them into plans that work for other artists and wondering why there's not an outcome there. So I think difference is just an opportunity to learn, not a place for fear to be bred. And I think we're kind of getting into that, which is really exciting. That, and of course, giants want numbers in other countries, but India may have 1 billion people, but there are 1 billion people with different preferences, opinions, and needs. So if you treat them like we treat each other in the West, by catering to their many multitudes and that they might have different tastes in music, you're likely to build a fan base that's going to stay with you forever, even if you outgrow your current sound.
Yeah, that's such a strong message where if a company or a brand or an artist wants a diverse audience, they themselves need to have a diverse team. And yeah, wow. But yeah, does anybody else have anything to add to that? Then, okay. Yeah, so now I guess going into nitty gritty then, even though we've already established that a bit, I guess more for Brittany, since you're on the ground level there for a project management. What's it like dealing with Asian artists versus US artists or Asian American artists?
I think that a lot of artists are the same. They all have their needs and their wants, and at the end of the day, they just want music out. I think that the main difference is working in K-pop. Obviously, as we've mentioned before, you're kind of dealing with companies, and there are a lot more players at the table because there are just a lot more decision makers. Whereas when now at Interscope, I'm working hand in hand with a lot of artist managers. It's a much smaller team. At 88 too, 88 is also management and label. So a lot of times for the artists that we manage directly, there were even less people at the table, and we were able to there was a lot of freedom in what we were able to do because you could kind of come up with an idea and action on it yourself. You didn't need permission or you didn't need approval. Whereas you'll find that with some other roles. But, at the end of the day, it's just people want to put music out and make a big moment around it. So it's not like working with the artists is vastly different, but there is a difference in, the teams kind of, and then for each market, everything looks a little bit different. Whether you're marketing to the US market, you're marketing to Southeast Asia, you're marketing to China. As Allison was saying, in China, it's a very different world because they have different social media apps, they have different DSPs, more things that you have to account for. Working K-pop in China is really interesting because that was when China was starting to ban K-pop, and K-pop idols weren't allowed to have social media platforms there or create profiles. So those are the nuances that you come across, but yeah.
Wow. Yeah, would anybody else like to add to that for project management?
I definitely think the platform bit about there being different DSPs, different social media platforms, also different consumption patterns. For example, in South Asia, YouTube, the platform is the largest music discovery place and where music is consumed, not YouTube Music, the app, or any other streaming app. And so visuals then inherently for an Indian artist become excessively more important than they might in a release of an artist that doesn't have a budget for visuals and is just starting out. And then I think there's always cultural nuances in every country. I speak Urdu, Punjabi, and Hindi. but I definitely catch myself being like, I'm a little nervous to have a conversation about what is the word for royalties in Punjabi? How do I explain this? So a little bit of that has been a fun learning experience and challenging. And the WhatsApp calls in different time zones, those are it for me.
Yeah, the bilingual part. I could barely tell my parents what I want for dinner, let alone do business transactions. Wow. But yeah, like wow, an hour went by already, and it didn't feel like an hour. But I guess we could go into some slightly more uh, heavier topics here. So I mean, um, in general, how are non-Americans consuming pop and hip hop? Because we do see some issues there, where they don't have an understanding of the historical and society context of America. Um, you know, Specifically the N word. We went there because Allison, you had that talk on your episode, and it was handled so well that I think in the wider audience, as more and more people consume hip hop, any race here, I'm seeing Asians and non-Asians are. Um, it's been interesting seeing how they consume this music. If you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot here, right? I think the thing that I'm constantly reminded of through my experience living in China specifically, was that oftentimes there is a lot of ignorance. I think that ignorance has a really negative connotation to it because that word can also simply mean not knowing better, right? And I think the things as Westerners that we want to keep in mind when we're kind of assessing other countries or other cultures and their understanding of our own is that the relationship between Black Americans in this country is very unique to the US. And yes, colonialism and slavery and things like that existed in other forms in other countries. But I think that the racial makeup of America is I can't think of a parallel that really mirrors it super well, especially not in Asia, that gives somebody who's spent their entire life and their entire career there a frame of reference to really understand it, right? And so I think oftentimes, I would meet young rappers in China and they would use the N word and they really just didn't understand what it was. Obviously for me as an American, I had like a visceral and immediate reaction against it because as far as I'm concerned, that's just not something that you get to say if you are not of, if you've never been on the receiving end of that word used as a slur. Like it's a reclamation of a term that was used against an entire group of people who were oppressed who were and still are oppressed in a very real way in this country. And I think paying respect to that, if you know better, is not negotiable, right? I think for those who don't necessarily know better, it's about education and recognizing that sometimes you do need to meet people where they are. As is the case with, even a conversation about allyship between two Americas. Two Americans. People start from a different place. And so I think that give people grace, try and help them understand like, hey, this is what this term really means. Hey, it's really complicated because of XYZ. And so, similarly, I would ask you or I would advise you to consider not using it if this isn't something that, you understand well, or you aren't ready to have a real conversation about it, because maybe you need to do a little more self-work, a little more education and whatnot. And so, I think interestingly too, especially in China, where you do have to remember, aside from the linguistic barrier, that there is not a lot of access to international or foreign media, right? And some of, like Google, for example, Google, YouTube, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, DSPs, all of them blocked in China, right? Like, I think even if you want to do that self-education work as, a Chinese kid who's never left the country and just simply wants to know more, it's actually a lot harder to do it too. So, and I think it's just something to keep in mind as we work with folks in Asia, that you can't necessarily assume the same sort of cultural understanding and nuances that we can to a degree, but not always, anticipate in working with folks like in the US.
Yeah, that's a great reminder. Like, like when Rich Brian, his original name was, Rich, with the C word. But yeah, Jashima, you had something?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Allison, but I think something to remember as well. Someone is doing construction in the airport. So if you can't hear me, I will speak later. Just let me know.
Oh, we're
Amy.
good. Yeah, we could hear you.
But I think that it's important to understand that I frequently ask myself how much my American education taught me about the rest of the world, despite how globalized and reliant the West is on the rest of the world. And it's not a lot, you know? And so meeting people where they are and being willing to try to explain to them before putting them in a box, because very few people understand the intricacies of what it's like to deal with certain things in America when you're Black, when you're an immigrant, when you're POC. And it's different for each of those communities. But hip hop in India is a very real, tangible, measurable thing right now because of a Bombay based rapper named Divine, whose story turned into what became Gully Gang, which is now a record label management agency with a movie that Bollywood produced that featured folks like Raja Kumari, Manj Music, and so it's not a theory anymore, it's a concept. And I think it's really important for everybody that lives in that in between to be able to articulate that if what we love about hip hop is the ability to articulate peril through poetry with music and instrumentation attached to that, we can do that without needing to offend or not educating ourselves on another community. And it's really that simple. But a lot of the ignorance I think I've firsthand experienced is lack of knowledge, not willful.
Wow. I'm so blown away by how nurturing your responses are. And yeah, I guess like that goes into like our next point, which is the opposite, where the anti-Asian and the hate crimes that, that came forth during COVID, that we're still going through now. And so I was just wondering, since in our last 15 minutes, if you want to drop some organizations for us to follow, and then how to recognize these issues and provide help, and maybe companies to support. Lionshare for one, an Asian American collective, and everything that we're all a part of.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm struggling to think of some organizations off the top of my head, but I think generally just being able to support, representation is what we try to do here at Lionshare. I think that is, it's the reason why I personally moved to Los Angeles, but it's also, I think, kind of the antidote to what's happening right now, because without representation, people don't have an understanding. They don't know, much. If they don't have any Asian friends or didn't grow up with Asians in their communities, it's like their knowledge is very limited to what is being fed by, maybe something that Trump said or that they watched on TV or whatever it is. You don't have, anything else to go by. So I think being able to, increase representation in media, which reaches people, on their phones, on their TVs, all these different places, really does help, fuel an understanding and a relatability, like all these types of things that help, create empathy and, all these things that are the opposite of hate. So I think being able to support organizations and communities that are working towards this is one actionable way to do it. If you're not able to like donate funds or anything like that. But I don't know, Allison, am I missing any, or are there other things that I should be shouting out that I'm forgetting?
I mean, yeah, I think like one thing that we were chatting about before we started the broadcast here on YouTube was that, Lionshare actually gets its name from the fact that 60% of the overall world's population is Asian. That's inclusive of Asia and the Asian diaspora. Yet we're still so underrepresented on music's sort of global stage. And I think that's true of entertainment too. And, I think if you look at some of the hate crimes, especially specifically the Atlanta shootings, which we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of, I think next week, actually, you see how the media representation specifically of East Asian women could have played into, the way that the the way that the person who did this thought of the women that ended up being his victims, right? So I think representation really does matter for sure. In terms of what you can do as an individual, because obviously the battle towards representation is, it's systemic, it's huge and everything, but I think things that we can do on our own, first off, I think starts with self-education, right? Learning, what kind of biases do I hold as an individual? Do I judge people of a different skin color because that's the way I was raised, or because that's the way that I saw, and was taught to be, either by my parents or by, the standards that they tried to adhere to in the US, which oftentimes were whiteness, right? So I think being real with ourselves about those types of things is the first step to understanding, right? I think the next step after that is to look at what circle of influence you really have the ability to affect. And I think even if you have, no social followers and everything, well, maybe you have a family, maybe you have friends, start with the people that are going to be amenable to a conversation with you, and find ways to make it personal for them. I think, one thing that I saw Kathleen do really well in 2020, specifically when, all of the protests and Black Lives Matter movement was like really picking up steam in a huge way, was, having a conversation with her parents about, what would our lives here in America have looked like if we were Black? Maybe we wouldn't have gotten a loan for the business that you started. Maybe we wouldn't have been able to move to the area that gave us access to the school district that gave us the education we now have, right? So I think, being able to make some of these issues feel personal and actionable for people is a really good sort of starting place. And I think for anybody who is keen to really dive into the subject more, there's a book that I couldn't recommend more called The Wake Up. It's written by an author and an activist who is actually a friend of Kathleen and ours. She is a Korean American queer identifying woman who's based in Oakland. And her book is all about bridging the gap between, good intentions and actual action. And so I think for anybody who really wants to take that next step on their own journey and whatnot, I really couldn't recommend a better starting place.
All right. And then, sorry, if you guys, sorry, I just got some messages that we have some questions on the YouTube chat thing. But yeah, if Robin and Lindsay could post it on the chat for us, and then that way we could wrap up this conversation with Jashima and Brittany.
Yeah, I think, I always start with a point of exposures audit about if my own life is reflective of the things I'm asking the world around me to embody, and if I'm spending enough time self-educating. So a lot of it is, are we attending events in other communities? Do we interact with the Latinx, with the Black community? Are we going to each other's events and amplifying each other? And I think the other part is, employment and embodiment. At Ode, the reason we feel comfortable saying we're proud of serving the South Asian diaspora and subcontinent is because my co-founder is Bangladeshi Muslim. We have a Goan artist development individual. 3 of our contractors are Nepali, Afghani, and Sri Lankan. And so we're not saying it to say it, we're living it. And I think that we look for the same things in our partners. And a couple of great folks to check out are Sandeep Morrison, who is an LGBTQIA activist based out of LA and a filmmaker who speaks to the queer Punjabi experience. Seema Hari is incredible. The Brown History podcast is a really, really cool project by this individual in Toronto. And you'll just learn the coolest things that maybe you didn't know about some of the South Asians in the world. So yeah, I think it starts in here and that reflects out there.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
I think too, it's about, like creating and opening up space for these discussions to happen, like Allison was saying, but allowing people the grace to like speak with you and make mistakes in their conversations and educate them, because this is all a learning process for all of us. And I think 10 years ago, we wouldn't be having the conversations that we're having right now. And in the past year, so many of these incredible Asian organizations and companies in support of, the Asian experience have come to light. There's Netflix's Gold, there's Gold House, there's Stop Asian Hate, there's Hate is a Virus. All of these incredible companies or organizations have come and initiatives have come from the conversations that we're having right now. And 10 years from now, it's going to be very different. And we're only going to get better, but only if we kind of allow ourselves the room to make mistakes and to have conversations like open and genuine conversations with people, and understand that we're all coming from a place of like, we're trying to learn, and nobody's going to be perfect, and you're not expected to like, know everything. But that we're doing this together.
Yeah. All right. And then, sorry, we're pressed for time here. So we've got some questions here. Let's do the one from Tractivist. Is this a friend of Lionshare? I recognize. How connected must Asian Americans be to the Asian music scene and industry? And will a stronger connection to Asia help your career in the USA?
I think subject matter knowledge on any market will help your career in any market. I think both, at least in my experience, behind the scenes facing and then artist facing, we're never Indian enough for India. We're never American enough for America, right? Whatever that means at any given time. But if you're really close to something you really like doing and you do it enough, there's someone else that really wants to consume it and do it too. And so I don't think you necessarily have to have cultural expertise in the same way, right? I can't speak for the other countries, but in India, at least, it's a population of 1 billion people with over 200, 300 languages alone, right? So even if I knew everything there was to know about my background in India, that would still be a drop in the bucket compared to the rest of the country. So I think being consistent about whatever communities you want to support and uplift is going to get you really far in either market, just because there's still such a nominal amount of people doing that in relation to the populations, both diaspora and subcontinent.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone want to add to that?
I think as like, if you are Asian, you probably feel some sort of connection to some aspect of your Asian culture or some community. And I think everything can be learned. So even if you don't, like, I went in, I was working K-pop throughout my entire time at 88 Rising, knew nothing about the K-pop industry. I'm not Korean myself. But it can all be learned as long as you're kind of willing to learn from people and have those conversations. And you'll, like, for everyone starting out in the industry, you're going to slowly build your connections and, the people that you're going to be talking to across any market as you go. So of course it helps, but you can just kind of start now.
Okay. Yeah. So consistency and just start. And then, so we got Hajime or Jaime. I'm so sorry. Where do you see the Asian music market in 5 or 10 years? Like, for example, Asian artists getting bigger domestically, gaining international popularity, or artists expanding into the U.S. and working with U.S. songwriters? Whoa.
That's a big question. I'll take a swing. So what I can say is, if you had asked me the same question about America 5 years ago, my answer would have been wrong. And if you asked me the same question 10 years ago, my answer would have been even more wrong. I think that the way that technology is changing the world and the way that we disseminate, share, and distribute information is also changing tremendously. Like, I think it's really hard to predict where any music market, I guess is what I'm saying, is going to be even in 5 years' time from now. But the one thing that I do feel a degree of confidence in is that, I think that the access to content in our native languages and in different countries' native languages and stuff. And you see how this is like moving on DSPs and everything too. I think that's allowing a lot of artists to be able to really cater to their home markets in a different and realer way, which is really cool. Like, for example, you would see, a French artist maybe in the past feeling as if they needed to sing in English in order to have international appeal, right? And I don't necessarily think that's true anymore. So I think that, the modern day music listener, and I should hope in the future that this continues, is a little bit more adventurous than they have been in the past. I think people are, more used to foreign language films, music, and products than they were previously. So what I hope, and I can't say that, I'm not putting this on the board as like a surefire prediction, but what I hope is that, that will help open the door for some of the Asian artists to come to different parts of the world and simply be themselves, not feel as though we have to make English language albums and vice versa and whatnot. Really keep the presentation of who you are and what you do as an artist authentic, and actually find reception for that elsewhere. So that's what my hope will be.
Yeah. And Kathleen, did you want to share, or Jashima? Oh yeah, Jashima. Oh, sorry. I don't know who's unmuting. But yeah, Jashima, you could go first.
Oh gosh. I think there's a lot to celebrate. I think sometimes we don't recognize progress, and I think that there's been a fair amount. So it's great to see Ravina Aurora and Aruj Aftab on the Coachella lineups, right? It's great to see a lot of folks scaling and growing. And I would say read the credits for the next 10 years, because I have a feeling they're about to make us feel a lot more seen than they ever have before, because it's happening. Content creators are blowing up, musicians are being discovered on TikTok, they're working with writers around the world that resonate with their sounds. And so, yeah, Allison summed it up really, really, really well. But I would also check out how diverse our own playlists are and who's on them, and maybe where we discover that music. And if you produce events, book lineups based on sonic curation, and then see if that diversity starts to create a ripple effect in the future. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Kathleen, I didn't know which one of us unmuted first.
I wasn't going to say that much more. I just wanted to agree with a lot of things that Allison was saying, and now you, Shiva. But I think, something that we're exploring on Lionshare, and also I've been exploring the past few months, is really just what's happening in Web3. And I think, the direction of what's happening is really going to put the power back to creators in a way that hasn't really been possible before. Even with the advent of the internet and YouTube and all these things, there's still very many like gatekeepers that exist across the board. And I think that, as this technology advances, my hope for it, because the potential for it is there, is that the playing field becomes a lot more equitable, and that, artists get to retain their rights and own their music, and really like have the ability to even just live off a fan base of, 100 fans, versus having to have, millions to really like be considered like a successful artist. Like, I think that that's the future of music just generally. And I think that, also on the Asian front, I think that just means that people will have the ability to discover artists in ways that they've never really been able to before, because, Spotify is choosing who's on New Music Friday, like there's these gatekeepers, I think, will start coming down. And I'm excited about that. So,
yeah. All right. So our last question now is, what's the best way from BT? What's the best way to reach out to people for opportunities? This person said their parents used to hand out resumes in person. What would you say, going in person is better, or just emailing work too?
Man, so I feel like this is a tricky question, because I think it depends on where and how you interact with a person. My recommendation generally is to do what feels genuine, right? If you are at a networking event, shake their hand, say what's up, ask them what they care about, remember what they care about, right? If it is, you met somebody online, maybe it's email, right? I think, excuse me, all of the best sort of connections that have either turned into friendships or incredible business relationships for me have started actually quite casually with a conversation. On the Lionshare side for us, we actually have a lovely little community on our Discord. And, a lot of artists and sort of young folks in the industry and more seasoned folks spend time in there recommending each other music and just making connections and sharing funny memes and news and stuff like that. And I think, when you're able to use that as a springboard in a way, sometimes it's easier to build a more personal feeling relationship. So if ever you guys want to chat with us, I can tell you where you can find me and Kathleen, and that is on our Discord, which is discord.gg/Lionshare. I'll put it in the
and then Lionshare is 2 S's.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. And then, the rest of the panel.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, like, look for opportunities where they exist and then make genuine connections. Like, I got my first job, like I was telling you guys, off of a tweet. And, just spoke with Brett, and it was a great conversation. And that's like kind of what kickstarted my music career. And from there, every role that I've gotten thereafter has been because of a connection that I had, or, like a friendship that I made, that has led me to where I am now. So people value authenticity. That's what they're looking for. And you can see right through it if you're not genuine. So I would just go into, it not not trying to get something out of it, but just with a genuine interest in the person, what they do, being supportive of whatever their endeavors may be, and that will come back to you.
Yeah, and Kathleen?
Second everything everyone said. One thing that I've always found really helpful is being specific, not in your ask, unless you have a specific ask, but just being specific in like your interests. So like I've always found it really helpful if people identify to me like, oh, I really want to shoot more like concert photography or something like that. And just like sharing what their interests are, what their goals are, because it makes it a lot easier for the people that you're meeting to like plug you into those opportunities. Once I hear like a friend, or see a friend post like, oh, I need a photographer for the show that's coming up, like I'll immediately remember like, oh, this person I talked to at this event last week told me they were wanting to shoot more, and things like that. And I realized that, it's, everyone is so busy. We meet a million people a day, like all these different things are going on. So it's making it easier for other people to help you help yourself always is, like it just helps in general. And I think that's sometimes it's a difficult thing for people to do, to like narrow down their focuses or their interests, because, I'm sure a lot of us have a lot of different things that we're into, but whatever that goal is or the current interest is, maybe narrow it down to one or two, just make it easy for people to remember you.
That's such a good point. I've definitely taken like, coffees with people who just come in very broad, and it's like, well, I want to help you, but I don't really know where to begin to do so. So that's a really good point.
I agree with all of that. And then I would say if it's career specific or the industry specific, have a portfolio of things that you've worked on that you're proud of, even if they're not massive. I think everyone's waiting for an internship or an opportunity or an in or a cosign, and those things are invaluable in some ways. But I wrote my articles when no one was reading them. I wrote them on a blog, and then I pitched an outlet, and all I did was ask to cover people that had never been recognized for work that inspired me, as opposed to what I thought would work in the world. So find out if there's ways you can offer before you ask, or if there's a way for you to showcase the things that you think you're good at, that you would like to get better at, or prove that you're, able to help in those categories, because everything matters.
Wow. Well, yeah, anybody would like to add some more to that? Yeah, I guess I have 2 cents here too. Yeah, I learned from an Asian American collective, Hang, where I brought a friend. His name is Kev. Shout out to Kev. He's an audio engineer for Atlantic Records, and he wore a shirt that says "Rappers with Puppies." Everyone flocked to him and was like, who's that? Is that Snoop? Who's that? And then so just having a conversation piece. And then I started doing that, where I was like wearing a dinosaur with like a Christmas sweater, like the paws are sticking out, and everyone came to me like, oh, that's a cool shirt, So if you're ever worried about networking, have a conversation piece, wear it. But it looks like we're Jashima has to go, so we all have to go now, but thank you everyone so much for being here, and everyone in the audience. So hope you have a safe journey, Jashima.
Thank
Great
you,
meeting everyone.
Thanks so much for having us, everyone.
And Amy, would you be willing to stay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you
you
very
guys
much.
so much for coming.
bye.
Thank you for having us.
Hope to see you in
very
person.
much.
Have
It
a
was-
safe
it was-
flight, Jashima.
It was fantastic. You guys all were amazing. Thanks so much for a great panel.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank
Good night,
you.
everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
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 Don't forget to end the
Yeah,
live
yeah,
stream.
yeah, I'm going to do that right now. Uh,
Wait till he ends.
Oh.
say